I'm Alexandra, and you're listening to Outer Travel in a Journey. Journeying now for 30 years into the life and practice of yoga, I have met many who have taken interesting turns, went past extraordinary bumps, and reached unexpected places. People with whom I shared conversations about everyday struggles, intimate realizations, larger questions, ideas, and dreams. So today, I'm passing on the mic to one of them so we could hear and celebrate the wisdom in people's differences and experiences. Welcome back to the show, How to Travel in a Journey. On my show today, I have Elise Marie Collins. Hello, Elisa. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you, although we barely know each other. This is like the few incidents where I'm going into uncharted waters with my guest. But I've read Elise's book, one book, even though you published already two, I understand. Did you? Yeah.
I
And
have three books. Yeah.
do you have three books? Okay. This is me doing the intro again all over wrong. This happens to me all the time. I think I'm well informed. Anyway, so my dear guest listener, you know me by now, and my funny introductions. So Elisa is actually a genetologist. Can we say that? Or how do you say that? And a yoga teacher. And you're interested in passing on the knowledge of Ayurveda like I do through the wisdom of Ayurveda. And why we are here together is because Elisa, who lives in San Francisco Bay, has had always a love for older people. And she really came to study older people and their behaviors and what makes old people thrive so they become centenarians. Yes, and that's what the book is about that I got really revved up about, the super ages. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to study older peoples, or what is your relationship and how you got hooked into it?
Yeah. So a couple ways. One is I had already published two books, and my publisher actually came to me with the idea. So it was funny, but I felt like it was something that came from outside, but came from a higher source. It came to me.
Yeah.
And so my mentor in publishing said, "We need a book called Super Ager. Can you write that book?" And I didn't know what the word meant at the time. I just said, "What is a super ager?" But I also knew I didn't know what it was, but I knew on some deep level I wanted to be a super ager. I wanted to learn about super agers, and I wanted to write that book. Something just sparked inside of me.
Yeah.
So
How come? Why did they ask you that? I mean, there must be something. What are the other two books? Let's start with the other two books then.
I wrote a book called, my first book was Chakra Tonics, and it was drinks for your chakras.
Ah, okay.
So it was all
I
about the
haven't heard
chakras.
about that either. Yeah, you can have drinks for your chakras, really. Like, are they herbal drinks, or what kind of
Yeah,
drinks are they? Yeah.
teas and smoothies and yeah, just maybe like almond milk, really simple drinks. But also there's something nice about connecting, because chakras, they're not something tangible, but you can, pick up your tea and drink it and think about, oh, this drink is rooting me. So it starts to bring in all levels of being. So that was the idea behind Chakra Tonics. It could
Yeah.
teach you about the chakras, it could nourish you, and it could also help you integrate those ideas that are very they're not something that we grow up with in the West. Chakras
Mm-hmm.
are sort of like, what are they? They're not,
Yeah.
I can't hold them in my hand.
Mm-hmm. And the second book was?
An A to Z guide to healing foods.
Oh, and is this based? I mean, as we talk traditions, and people are always curious about where the roots are from, So where do these healing foods come from that you were
I
writing
think
about? Hmm.
I wrote about mainly healing foods that you could find Pretty easily. And a lot of the foods now you can find them very easily either online or in the grocery store. And I actually was gonna, it was supposed to be a very small book. I have
Mhm.
it behind me. I can show it to you in the end, but it ended up being much bigger. Like it was supposed to be part of a series of like little tiny books that you could carry around with you. But I
Mhm.
loved researching all the healing foods so much that it was more like this size book, like Super Ager.
Ah, great, you got it there.
I
Yeah.
tried to base it on, I tried to give people a little bit of different philosophies. Like there's a couple pages on macrobiotic diet, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, because they all have a little bit different angle. And
Yeah.
I think each one of us gravitates to something and maybe goes with that. And there could be different reasons behind that. But my idea was I was a mom. I mean, I'm still a mom, but at the time feeding my son, I was looking for inspiration, and I like your inside out kind of thing, like where, oh, I read about it and then that makes me think, oh, let's make that, because you always get bored,
Yeah.
make the same thing, or you want some to get some inspiration.
Brilliant. And so I still don't see the connection. And then they approached you and asked you to write about super agers. So tell me about that. Why do they ask you? Or why did they ask you?
My my friend and mentor in publishing, uh, she knows trends. I think that that's part of the way publishers think is I think it's different. They're looking at trends out there in the world, bigger picture trends, and I
Mhm.
think she saw the connection, just like she saw with chakras. Chakras now they're much more known, but I wrote that book 15 years ago, and that chakras weren't such a big thing. So
Mhm.
things trend and change. There's a huge number of older adults. The number of older adults is increasing around the world, so that's the trend, and people are wanting to age differently. So I think she saw that. She sees the
Ah.
keywords,
Mhm.
and I think it's a bit of kismet. Like there's something where just how do ideas arrive, and they arrive hopefully in the right
Yeah.
place at the right time.
Yeah.
and I was like, yes, I love this idea.
Yeah, and so can we reveal a little bit about the book? Because next to the habits that you described that we both teach from Ayurveda, like the things that don't require you to know so much about your own body type in the first place, but the things that are given by nature to everybody to align themselves, you use that concept of the dinarchaya, as we call it, the daily movements and observances, I would almost say. You use that to propel that into the work to centenarians, or like how they can benefit from aligning with nature, right? Is that?
Yes. Well, what I found fascinating about studying older adults was that, then I ended up getting a gerontology degree because I loved it so much. I wanted to learn more, and I found out that it was something you could study.
Mm.
So, in the study of gerontology is just simply the study of aging, but you can't isolate someone's life. You can't just study this part of their life, like, and measure it from maybe 50 to 100 or 65 to 100, however you want to slice it, because that part of life is before that, all of life led you to that point, right?
Mm. Yes.
So you know that in Ayurveda, I think that this is my thing. I think gerontology is like the Western the Western Ayurveda, because you have to study everything. It's
Mm.
not isolated. Most
Ah.
social sciences and sciences in Western thinking are very narrowed down, drilled down. I've always been attracted to multidisciplinary. Uh, my undergraduate degree was multidisciplinary, and I like to put everything together. So gerontology is multidisciplinary. So the centenarians, everything that got them to live to 100, it started literally at birth, just like Ayurveda.
Mm.
Everything, every step of the way,
Yeah.
thing, how people live their life. So that's what I find very interesting and totally relates to the Dinacharya.
I see. You cannot just swirl around your life in the last 10 years and say like, this is it. I mean, you can swirl it around to become a little bit more easeful, but probably not if you've been living like shit your entire life. Although, you know, saying that, having said that, I've been following Krishna Das a little bit, you know, and what I heard about his life, I mean, he went deep into drugs and depression and came out of it and went back in. And if anything, I see him thriving as coming closer and closer to the hundreds. I mean, he's not there yet, but keep my fingers crossed. And I could almost see that for him. So is there exceptions to the rules? Is there anything you've come across?
I think that I don't know if I call it exceptions to the rules, but being supported by family, by friends, by community. And Krishna Das is a great example because he's got a great supportive community. I think that is what I found in research is more powerful than than I ever thought. I thought, oh, diet and exercise is everything. But then I started to dig into the research and look at older adults. And if they have a supportive group of friends and family, social connections are huge. And your thinking, your mindset. I think that the Dinacharya supports that though. So the more in that positive state, people want to be around you. You know, if you think of older adults that you want, they're fascinating. And when they're in balance, you want to listen to them, hear their stories, hear their wisdom. Not every single older adult has that. Some of them might be more out of balance. But those are the older adults I want to be around.
Yeah, and this is common to be mentioned in people who are interdisciplinary, like I am, is that we are a little bit saddened by the fact that we culturally have fallen apart as such between the different generations, that we don't intersect generations as often as other cultures still do. Where do we find these cultures actually? I would be interested. Do you know who are still intersecting generations or have people live under one roof?
Well, the blue zones always have interaction. And a professor that I studied with found that centenarians, not just in the blue zones, he also studied them in India, where because maybe some. So let's start with blue zones. Let me just explain.
Yes, let's explain blue zones.
And I'll explain about other cultures. So blue zones are 5 areas in the world where geographically people live over. There's more centenarians, more people living over 100 than any other place. Okay. So I'm just going to say one thing that's important is that all of those places, they have to have a birth certificate because this is Western science. There has to be a birth certificate. They want the proof. There's a few other places where my professor specifically studied in India and went and did field studies in the Spice Mountains above Kerala, and he's actually from Kerala. There's no birth certificates. But to me, it's like nobody's gonna lie about your age. They're not gonna be, and you can trace it back to historical events, and I mean maybe there's a year or two, but when you're 100, 110, there's super centenarians who are over 110. I don't think anybody's, so let's just say that I believe them if they're that age.
Yeah, that is a very kind of dicey area because I also know of people and I have read about people's in some of my teacher's books, like Robert Swoboda talks about his teacher, and he talks about sadhus he met that were about 300 years old, and can't prove it and are not about to prove it. So we are talking still like people who think in a dualistic world, open for spirituality. But But what is more fascinating that you're not only credentializing or giving credentiality to the age, but to the factor that that it's common. The blue zones kind of describe areas where it's common that you can get old with, without a blink of an eye, so to speak, and a little bit more in a laid back manner. So we were stuck on that point. So you say that the conditions and the intersections of generation is mostly happening in blue zones. That's where we got stuck, I think.
Yeah, so a lot of well, for one thing, to respect and really just enjoy older adults, not think of them as like, oh, they're out of it or they don't know what's going on, let's put them further away from society. That's just not part of the blue zones. They're more traditional places, and 4 of them are geographically isolated, so they never got the message that it's bad to be old. And they just didn't have that in one of the places, Sardinia, which is an island in Italy, and that's where men live. The most men live to be over 100, and one of the reasons they believe is because these men are shepherds and they walk these crazy steep hills most of their life, like 7 to 10 miles daily, and not just flat, but they're going up, up, up with they're shepherds of goats, and they're taking the goats around. So yeah, so no, I forgot what I was. So yeah, so they have what I wanted to say was they have a calendar for men that are over 100. So instead of having a calendar, for maybe like sometimes it's like a pinup girl, men that are over 100, those are the people that are celebrated. So the centenarians are on the calendar, and how exciting and interesting these men that are over 100 are.
Yeah, and you were mentioning that we are ready to discard old people because sometimes of their kind of strict worldview. I mean, we've probably all intersected with some elder people on the street, and sometimes they seem so sweet, and then they kind of unpack all their things, then the loveliness goes away. But why did you come across in your research? Did you come across why do we do that? Is it like we are only interested in the new, or why are we not seeing the wisdom in what they have to say? Do they not package that right? Package, how that sounds. But do they not talk the right language for us? Or why is it that we have stopped the intersection with them?
Yeah, well, good question. I don't know. I think it started with individualism, and um, especially the United States is a very individualistic culture. So if we're only looking at what I call the form and the fire element, if we think of it all as fire and competition and just what we see on the surface, then yeah, you would think that older people are useless because it's all about your body and your body is falling apart. But as we know, as yoga teachers and yoga health coaches, there's more, but there's this, what you want to call it, spirit or essence, whatever your beliefs are, there's something inside you that is so much more than your physical body. So I think somehow when we disconnected from that, we lost this importance of growing older, because that is the vata, the inspiration stage of life. And that's what I want to bring that back, because I think we need it more than ever, especially in our country, in the United States. We're in a very divisive time. And so I think that the wisdom of seeing the big picture of the vata stage of life is much needed now, and being vulnerable, being vulnerable, because you are vulnerable. You need help when you're older.
Yeah.
People could take advantage of an older person because they maybe don't have as much physical strength, or your mind gets a little slower. You can work to alleviate that or mitigate that. But Yeah.
Let's go back to the blue zones. You said there's 5, and then you suddenly mentioned 5 places in Europe. You know, Sardinia. I used to live in Ireland. I was in Sardinia, so I'm familiar with all the places you mentioned in um, Europe. But do you mean by zones? Now I'm losing a little bit the sight of how do we define blue zones?
Yeah. Well, they're environments and places where demographers could go and find a high number of people who are living, and they could verify their birth certificates that were living over 100. The reason they call it blue zones is because literally the first demographer circled the area, and I think the first place was in Sardinia, and they circled that area with a blue pen and said this area is a blue zone.
Oh, wow.
So then it became a term, blue zone. It became a thing.
And what is so special about these areas? I mean, you said, okay, the men in particular, they engage in physical activity, obviously. If they climb, they are out in nature, they're out in wind and weather, they're not interested in electronics as we are, and they also stay away, obviously, from the beating of the daily onslaught of bad news, like newspapers and whatever we engage with. What else is characteristically for the blue zone, or is there anything else to it?
Yeah, there's so many commonalities, and then each one has a few unique things that are of interest. And I mentioned one of them, which is the men live longer in Sardinia.
Yeah.
And so some of the commonalities are moving naturally. Nobody goes to the gym. And their eating habits are all a little different because, of course, that's based on your environment. And as I mentioned before, 4 of the places are traditional, more traditional cultures, and they were geographically isolated. So do you want me to name the 5?
Yeah, please.
Okay, let's see if I can do them. Sometimes I forget one. But there's Icaria in Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, and then there is Sardinia, Okinawa, Japan,
Uh-huh.
and then Loma Linda, California. And that's the exception. Loma Linda's where there's a high concentration of Seventh-day Adventists, and that's a religion, a Christian religion, but it's very interesting. They were always very interested in health, and they formed a strong community.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of yeah, many Kellogg's Corn Flakes, which is a cereal. Now it's not really thought of as a health food, but when it started, that was kind of an unusual healthy breakfast back maybe 100 years ago, and that brand was started by Seventh-day Adventists. So they were always trying to look for healthy ways of living, and they self-isolated. And the reason I think that's interesting is because I think that shows us that in the modern era, we could set up an environment that would be like a blue zone. We don't necessarily have to geographically isolate ourselves, but we could set things up where we're supporting each other.
So a question that came up earlier for me was, if we would love to live 100 years and more, what do you think is the benefit of that to society? And the other question, I'm going to put it right here, is do we need to move to blue zones? I mean, you almost answered that, so maybe you want to start with the second question.
Okay, so the benefits of centenarians, and then the other one was, do we need to move to blue zones? No, I don't think you need to move to blue zones, but how can you surround yourself with people that support you? And if you are planning, not everybody wants to live a long life. Let's just put that on the table. Not everybody cares, but a lot of people are interested. And I also would add that living a long life, those habits also help you to live a full life, a more satisfying and happy life, in my opinion. So the benefits of having centenarians around are, they tell stories. They've seen life and history. I think there's something where, I kind of see it like maybe a mountain that we're circling around, and we keep coming back to the same problems and the
Mm-hmm.
same, and when we talk about intergenerational conversations and relationships, I think that's where there's something that helps evolution, when we have um, the new ideas, and then we have the things that you can't like, there's no bullshit. I just did a talk with somebody who's a therapist, and he didn't say his age, but he said he was getting closer to 80, and he just had these great wise things to say
Mm-hmm.
about life and about practice and all the things that he experienced. And there's just something like, wow, I learned a lot from him. Where he sits, he can see the new things, but he's not so much caught up in every new thing. He's staying, I think, because sometimes when you're young, I mean, you've got fire, you've got excitement, everything new, and there's an energy. We need that energy to propel the world forward, but we also need that view. And I think it's the air element, the view of the elders, where they look and see the bigger picture, and they're watching things that the younger people might not see.
Mm.
So maybe for the,
Yeah, and
yeah,
they have nothing to chase because they feel like they are already satisfied with their lives, so all there is to do is to be, I imagine, you probably have come across more super ages than I have, but I imagine from a place of when you are noticing you're getting older and maybe you also are taken care of. I think that's one of the things we talk about here. If your body is okay, if your mind is okay, if you're financially supported, all you're missing is probably community and good rhythms, to keep going and thriving and staying in your joy, staying out of the madness of the shiny object syndrome, or whatever we call it these days, fears of missing out or in the FOMO. And then in that, it's almost the highest, it's almost what everybody is trying to teach us on the spiritual path, right? What the Buddhists talk about and what the yogis talk about and the Vedis talk about. It's these like, just be, just see what's coming your way. And they already living that because there's nothing to chase no longer, right?
yeah, I would say that's a great way of putting it. I think centenarians and older adults learn to detach. They probably wouldn't have gotten to where they are unless they understood the importance of friends, of family, of not, turning off the TV, not listening to it, or not being caught up in, that detachment. That's the view. I've seen this before. They've seen cycles. I do want to say though that often older adults do have goals,
Hmm.
and even if they seem um, well, there's one of my teachers did a video of a super centenarian. I believe he was 116, and he's one of the elders that live in the Spice Mountains. And I can even give you the video because you can put it in the
Yeah,
podcast notes.
we love.
It's an amazing video because he's a spiritual teacher in his community, and he says that he's looking forward to uh, being the officiant over his, I think it's his great granddaughter, great something granddaughter's wedding. And right now she's, at the time of the video, she's 2 years old. So he's believing he's going to live another 15 years. He's already 116. But that gets him up every morning. He may or may not live that long, but we need those things to urge us on. It's a balance. It's a balance of, he is being, you can see in the video, he walks, he does things every day, he enjoys nature, and then he has these goals. And we didn't talk about kids, so I'll just throw this in with the super
Please.
centenarian, because all the kids in the village and in that video, you can see they love to spend time with this man, and they love to hear his stories. Kids love stories. So there's a beautiful synergy that we don't have as much, especially in Europe and in the West, where sometimes people move for a job and they move away from parents and grandparents, or well, grandparents. So the bond between grandchildren and grandparents is very special because the kids naturally don't judge the older adults, even in our Western culture, and they see the value. I think kids just naturally see that value and love to hear the stories and love to hang out with their grandparents.
Yeah, it reminds me because you mentioned Ireland earlier on, and it really triggered something in me because I lived there for a very long time. And what I noticed and what I was aching for and missing was what they often celebrate much more, even if they don't celebrate it, but it's natural to them to kind of have these regular meetings, these regular phone calls. And I certainly don't have that with my family, although we also had a big family. But in Germany, that wasn't so supportive, or it was more about the individuality and, making your own way and, finding your own family. And in Ireland, they are super connected still. And also, then you get to, when you have all these intersections, it's like a whole tribe raises one child. It's not like they have a lot of kids usually in Ireland, or they used to have, but they also have the tribal view. They often don't see themselves alone with the fact that they have that. And one of my good and dear friends moved to Berlin, not with me, but long before me, from Ireland. And she adopted a grandmother, a German grandmother. Can you believe that? And it was so funny. I was like, wow, she is really knowledgeable about like how you have to make your own tribe in a foreign city. Hmm.
That's a great story. I love that. Yeah.
Hmm. So why would you recommend people to read your book, Super Ager? What can they learn from that?
I recommend reading my book because I tried to put two layers in the book. One is, I would say, more prescriptive,
Mhm.
and as both say Alexandra, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alexandra and I are both yoga health coaches, and we know and we've studied Ayurveda, the practices, especially the daily practices, that's important. And I also put in things about social, being social. Think about, if you live a long life, you want to have many friends, because not everyone's going to live as long if you're 100 years old.
Hmm.
You might need to make younger friends too.
Yeah.
And the other layer is, I tell stories of older adults in the book, because if you don't have grandparents, or not everybody grew up around their grandparents, or grew up, as you said, in individualistic societies.
Hmm.
We may, maybe our family of origin moved away from grandparents or great grandparents, and we maybe talked to them on the phone, or maybe they didn't, maybe they weren't alive. There's so many different ways that we may not be in contact with older adults. So when you read about the stories of older adults that are thriving and living well, it sparks a different part of your brain, not just like, oh, I should do this and this is what I should do, but it opens you to possibilities. Stories affect many regions in our brain, and they wake us up. So I put stories in there of many older adults to give you possibilities and hope.
Yeah, and they're beautiful stories. As I said, I really loved your book, and I was amazed about the blue zone effect. And I looked up Grace, and I was already scheming, how do I get there? And it's really remote and it's isolated, and it's scary to think about that's necessary. But how I think about my life these days is that it's isolated enough, but what you're giving to me right now and what I'm hearing, and maybe the listener is hearing that too, maybe it would be good to branch out a little bit more, just really to branch out beyond family. And this is what we both are trying to do. We're trying to create tribes. We're trying to say, like, beyond your family and beyond your nearest dearest friends, that not so many maybe have kept from school days, or because I moved a whole lot of times and you moved a whole lot of time. I mean, you didn't move, but you traveled, and I lost many of my friends, and I changed a lot, and now I looking for new interconnections, and we're both trying to do that for everybody. We can make these family or these kind of supportive interconnections if we open ourselves up to the vulnerability of life, as you say it, you know, like, or not that life is vulnerable, but we are vulnerable in life. And so the more people keep our minds uplifted and supported, the more we can, you know, look at a healthy, thriving life over the next few decades, hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can always, that's something you can always look out to new people, to make new friends, to even have your own family of choice. You can choose, you know, because some people maybe have an unhealthy family
Yeah.
and they might need to choose a different family, but it's really important to surround yourself with supportive people.
Yeah, I think that is so important to see that, and to really see whether people want to um, connect with you and hold you up to your dreams and visions. I mean, this is what we kind of both speak that language through Kate Stillman, who was on this podcast as well. But if you're interested and haven't listened to it, but it's exactly that, noticing, like even the Krishna Das example I gave by accident, you know, but that made sense to me, that that sense of, if there's a whole lot of people cheering with you because you are open-hearted, then it gives you thrive. Yeah, I definitely see that in the sanghas, around these people. One last word to the audience. Is there anything you want to give as advice? Or, yeah, do you have anything to leave us with?
Yeah, I think I like what you just said, being open-hearted. I think that that's what I learned from older adults. They open their heart uh, for the most part, especially as you get to be what we would call in gerontology the oldest of old, over 85, living with an open heart. And yeah, maybe connect to an older adult. I love your friend that adopted a German grandmother because that's from the heart. You know, that's
Yeah.
not what is she gaining from that? Maybe an open heart, I believe. And that
Mm.
maybe sounds, when we look at the surface, oh, that's maybe we would think a waste of time. But no, she's gaining something beyond measure, which is that
Yeah.
open-hearted connection from generation to generation.
Thank you, Elise, for spending time with us today. And best luck. Are you planning another book, or are you just gonna help this book a little bit more on the road?
I don't have anything specifically
Mhm.
planned. I am just, it is a lot of work to write a book. So I'm continuing to promote this one and just enjoy learning and spreading the word about
Mm.
superagers. But we'll see. I definitely will write more books when they come to me.
Okay, thank you so much. And by the way, I already saw it's an Amazon bestseller. You might not be a fan of Amazon, but if it says something, I think you can be proud of. So Super Ager by Elise Marie Collins. Go and buy it and enjoy it and listen to the story she has to tell. Okay, goodbye. Thank you. If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.